Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking with Grayson Milbourne, who is the Security Intelligence Director at OpenText. And we're going to be talking to Grayson about some new research about the current threat landscape. And in fact, I think the title of the research is the 2023 OpenText Cybersecurity Threat Report. We're going to be talking about the findings and some of the recommendations based upon that report. But before we do that, I want to say hi to Grayson. Grayson, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mark. Glad to be here. So I'm part of OpenText Cybersecurity, and so that's a new division within OpenText that incorporates all of the cybersecurity offerings that the company has put together over several acquisitions over the past several years. So what's cool is that this threat report is something that I've actually been the lead data generator. I then thankfully work with a team to help me flush out and turn metrics into a meaningful text. But I believe this is my 8th year in generating this report. And so it's really been kind of cool to look back through time and see how we've been able to improve on the data that we collect to provide more meaningful information, and also just the trends and seeing how some areas are improving, other areas remain persistent problems. And unfortunately, in some cases, we also see the problem continues to get worse.
Yeah. So before we talk about those problems, maybe you can talk a little bit about the methodology behind this research. And, you mentioned that you were involved with helping collect the data and curate it. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually a great thing to start with, because there's a lot of different threat reports out in the market, and they each have like their own take. And one of the things that's unique with our report is that it's really a direct reflection of our own customer environments and the experiences that they've had with threats that they face. And just by the architecture of our product, we collect telemetry about all file encounters, all websites. And so what's great is we kind of get that real world picture for, how are threats effective at circumventing the layered defenses that, or just defenses in general that that companies put up to try to thwart these things. And so it gives us a real accurate, at least through the eyes of our customers, perspective of the trends and the threats that they face.
Well, in terms of numbers of organizations that the research covered, can you give me some insights on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the data, so it's broken into a couple of different categories. But when we think about malware, the malware information comes from our endpoint customer base, which is about 10 million consumer customers and about 10 million endpoints in the SMB space. And so from the threat research perspective, we combine all of this data. But from the analytics perspective, it's nice to separate it out. And there are definite clear differences and trends that we see. For example, with like infection rate, not too surprising, but consumer PCs see almost twice the infection rate that business PCs see. Not that surprising, right? Most business PCs have additional layers of security. People use those PCs for that one purpose, whereas our personal PCs, our kids use them. We use them for non-work purposes. There's just a higher chance of encountering an infection, which I think is meaningful because especially in this post-pandemic work dynamic, a lot of people are working remote either completely or, I now work in the office a couple days a week, but still, there's a lot of mixed device usage going on. And so it just shows the importance of having managed devices for systems that connect to corporate resources.
So just to clarify, the number of attacks is not double for individually owned or personal devices. It's the actual successful, malware attacks. The ones that, and the reason is because people, they don't have their AV.
Yeah, they go to websites they might not go to, and they handle their computer. They might not keep things up to date. Patch management's a really critical component to successful cybersecurity defenses. It's always frustrating when I do IT work for my mom and I see, the red update button in the upper right corner of Chrome. And I'm like, you need to click that button. I don't know why it doesn't auto update. It really should. But so there's a lot of different things like that. So, whereas in a corporate environment, they're much better at keeping certain things up to date. But, the rate of infection is literally twice. And that's really just calculated by the number of threats that we prevent or detect within those different groups, whether it's consumer or business.
Okay, excellent. I did notice in the research that one of the notable trends was a significant increase in concealing the location of URLs hosting malware in phishing sites.
Yeah.
Explain what that means
What that
in,
means, right. So,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So on the web side of things, it's a little bit more dynamic. And so what I mentioned before, the file-based data comes directly from our customers. The web-based data really comes from our customers and also a lot of proactive discovery. And whenever we discover something that is malicious, whether that's a malicious URL or perhaps an IP address that sits behind that, we want to identify the hosting location. And there's just benefit for us to understand this. It's data we expose to our customers, so they can act on it depending on how they may have integrated BrightCloud side of the technology, which was really more of our web-based threat intelligence. But from an interesting to report on perspective, it's been fascinating to track where malware hosting takes place. And
Hmm.
what we also know is that there's a lot of ability to mask that location. So either using a proxy network or using Tor, um, we don't have an accurate way to determine the actual origin of the attack. And so what we've seen, unfortunately, is an increase in this use of masking. And we've always seen it very high levels of location masking when it comes to malware that is hosted at a URL. So like where malware is hiding on the internet by the actual URL that points to it. But we used to see much less of this within phishing pages. And phishing often, the goal is not to have the website blocked. And if it's a suspicious site, like a Chase login page that's being hosted in India, perhaps somebody's like, wait a second, that doesn't, it doesn't pass like the really low bar of suspicion. So we've just seen an increase in overall masking, which to me says it's becoming easier. And particularly, we saw that increase within phishing URLs, and really, there's been a pretty significant there's constant development going on within phishing kit activities. So similar to like ransomware as a service, we see similar phishing kits as a service. Well, it's less of a service. You purchase the kit, and it has the flexibility to provide some of these baked in evasive techniques, just lowering the bar basically to allow it to happen.
And when you say you're seeing these, where and how are you seeing them?
Well, so we do a lot of proactive research. GitHub is a surprising area to see where certain different tools are posted, and so some of it begins there. But we also track and monitor activities within dark web hacker forums and where these things are posted. And thankfully, there's also a fantastic open community and a lot of great research that's done by security practitioners from all around the industry, really. And so following those trends aligns with the data that we see. And so, one of the challenges with the report each year is that, it starts off by collecting the metrics. And then it's like, okay, well, what really sticks out and why is it different? And okay, well, this is really different from last year. Why? And why
Hmm.
is never just as simple as, oh, this one factor. It's always a confluence of things that really end up driving these changes. And in the report, we really try our best to shed light on what we think is impactful.
Hmm.
Um, and so in that case, these are the conclusions we've come to.
Excellent. So maybe just to kind of break it down in more simplistic, what would the end user, what should they be looking out for in the case of these, the concealment of location URLs and masking of phishing campaigns?
So I don't know that like end users really need to take that into too much context for changing their behaviors. I think it's more of an indicator that evasion is a top priority for threat actors, and that we're increasingly seeing them take steps to be harder to detect. I think masking URL hosting makes it more challenging to, say, for example, just block certain low reputation requests from a certain geography. And so, by eliminating that capability, you then are relying on other levels of indication. Um, so, to me, it's sort of an interesting stat. It did surprise me because historically, especially for phishing, we saw a very considerable increase year over year in the number of phishing URLs that had their geo IP masked. And so, I think that's what I think the reasons for it are. But as far as what people need to do different, I think there's not quite the overlap there. I think what I take away, I think a bit more is just the the impacts of layered defense. And
Mm.
one of the things that we report on is the overall just infection rate amongst our customer base. And what we've seen is several years of decline. And decline is not necessarily a bad thing, right? That's exactly what we want to see.
Mm.
But people will ask, well, like, is the problem getting better? And unfortunately, this is where it's, part of our data is reflective of our customers. And what we've advocated to our customers is a strategy of layered defenses. And what our data actually shows us is that the customers of ours that are embarking on a layered approach see far fewer threats. And so
Mm.
the biggest impact to the decline in malware encounter rates are improvements in our customers' utilization of a layered security approach. And so just for example of that, one of the solutions that's really effective, it's more than just pure efficacy, but DNS, excuse me. DNS has been around since the beginning of the internet and was not really designed with cybersecurity threats in mind. And so, as the address book for name resolution, it's it's something that deserves security. And so we've delivered a product called Secure DNS that basically privatizes your DNS. So it does DNS lookups over HTTPS instead of in clear text. But the other benefit to that is that we control that address book. And so, in a case that a user maybe encounters some new unknown malware that the endpoint, say, doesn't detect, there's a chance that our threat intelligence on the Bright Cloud side of things for the web is aware of that C2 address. And so maybe you have a new dropper, it reaches out and we say, oh, no, we're not going to give you back the address that you're looking for. We're going to block that. And so in fact, when we look at customers of ours who use both of our endpoint and our DNS protection solution, they see 30% fewer infections. And so as more of our customers use both of our solutions, that's also dragging down our encounter rate with threats. Which is the goal, right? Like, I think that's great. Is it the the scary the problems getting worse metric? No, but there are certainly those other examples, and particularly when we look at ransomware, which is continues to be the number one threat facing especially small to medium sized businesses that might not survive having to pay $100,000, $200,000 ransom. That or the disruption of the attack in many cases might be enough to take them out of business entirely. And what our data shows over the last year is that there was for most of the year a downward trend in the average size of a business that was targeted by ransomware. And this is at bad odds with a survey we did last year, looking at we did this with IDC, but looking at over 1,100 businesses in the SMB space, and excuse me, and looking at their perception of risk. And what the two of the stats that really stuck out is 60% of them had admitted to having an encounter with ransomware in the last year, which is a really alarming number. And then 67% said they didn't think or they weren't sure if they were a target. And it's like, okay, well, most of you are encountering this problem, but even more of you don't think or not sure you're a target. And so this is because people really think, and they hear about ransomware, at the very high end, the outlier side of things that actually gets media attention. But without the media attention, a lot of these average consumers and small business owners, they don't perceive the risk. They think that they're way under the radar, and that why is somebody going to want to, break into my mechanic shop that has 12 employees? Why are they going to want to do that? Well, you have a business and you have 12 employees, and your layers of security are probably less robust or maybe lacking. We see a vast majority of ransomware attacks targeting smaller and smaller businesses. And at the same time, the costs are going up. And so what we saw by the end of this last year was that the median ransomware payment was over $200,000. And, you hear a lot about these $1 million plus ones. Okay, that's great. But if you're a very small business, $200,000 is a very significant chunk of change. And more frustrating is, this isn't from our data, but I read one earlier this week that said something like 84% of people are paying. And so this is also at odds with something the FBI released.
Where did you get that information?
Yeah, hold on. I will. If you give me just a...
So you're saying crime pays. Hey.
and so here's why I'm not surprised, because there's a lot of shame that goes into
Admitting that you got hit.
Admitting that you got hit, having to notify your customers. A lot of times today, over 84% of the time, they steal your data as well. And we're even seeing some operations no longer encrypt, just steal and then threaten the fines and the punishment for leaking that data. But the FBI last year also released that they said that they had a third fewer people reach out to them claiming they need help because of a ransomware attack. And so from the FBI's, from CISA and their collaboration, they saw a 33% decrease. But wait a second, like, is that is it a decrease, or is it people aren't coming forward and admitting the problem? Right. Which is a problem, because if the less people come forward, the less that these capable organizations that can actually make an impact and take down groups like Hive, they need to understand who to go after. And the less that companies are forthcoming with attribution information, the less clear of a picture government agencies and multinational collaborative efforts have at identifying and disrupting the most damaging cybercrime rings, so to speak.
Well, and another potential issue is, depending on what industry you're in and where you're located geographically, you may be required. You may be required to report any breaches, and sometimes I think with GDPR it's 72 hours. Yep. So if you just sit on that information and you've paid off, and you could be getting in trouble from both sides. And
see, this is why GDPR is sort of a double-edged sword. And while it had really good intentions, we see these Conti leaks, or most of the major ransomware as a service organizations have these sites where they literally shame those vendors. And as early parts of the negotiations and the manipulation process, they remind you that you're going to have this fine, and so there is a lot of motivation not to acknowledge the problem and to try to sweep it under the rug. And you're absolutely right. Like, different verticals absolutely see different problems with this, and that's something else we actually do report on in the annual threat report. It's an optional field. About 40% of our customers choose to fill out one of 20 or so different verticals. And of course, as you would expect, manufacturing has been the number one. They're 50+% over the average year over year for the last several years.
And why is that?
Well, it's because it's very disruptive, and so hitting manufacturing, you impact both up and downstream supply chains are also impacted by your disruption. And so they know that they have a higher chance. And that's part of it. The other piece of it is that manufacturing in a lot of cases uses older and out-of-date systems that are more expensive to upgrade and keep current. And I think this is also a significant problem within the industrial control space. Something that's being addressed, but what our data shows is that these are top targets. And then following that is also managed services. And so, MSPs, for example, people who have access to lots of other customer networks, well, geez, they're a great one to compromise. And so, they also had considerably higher than the average infection rates when we looked at verticals.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the I guess main point of the discussion so far is that the threat landscape hasn't necessarily changed radically in one direction or the other. The actual number or of threats, depending on the type of threat, may have gone up or slightly down, but the big delta is between companies or organizations that have implemented some type of multi-layered defense versus individuals who just typically do their own consumer thing. There is a big gap, and I think you said it was double or three times.
Yeah, it's slightly, actually just under double the infection rate within the consumer environment than it is within the business environment. So that to me tells me to be very mindful of remote employees and and insisting on using managed devices for access to corporate information. That's a really big one. Certainly the layered defenses is something that we advocate for. Security in depth is a really great solution. We like to call it cyber resilience, basically, using zero trust principles. And cyber resilience is really a 6-step framework that starts with identification. So you need to know what you need to protect. This isn't just your data. This is also individuals. Points of failure. It's a holistic exercise. It's not entirely just cybersecurity. It's resilience for your business. And so, identifying your assets and, and what's important that needs to be protected. Step two is protect those, and understanding the differences. So, having data backup, having, endpoint security, your account access management, patch management, protecting your environment. And then there's like the detection stage. And so despite our best efforts to protect, having the ability to identify if something has gone amiss, like being able to understand if an account has been compromised, is something is abnormal, and then the ability to respond. And so I think response is really where a lot of companies fall short. Having a response plan, a playbook that you don't create on the fly, especially with ransomware, because the number one thing ransomware actors also do is say, guess what? The price doubles in 24 hours.
Right.
We're going to make the problem worse. And so you don't want to be scrambling when you have a time ticking money clock, creating a plan for the first time. And this is why we do fire drills and we practice certain things that, you don't expect it to happen, but if it does, this is not the time to panic and run around and make the problem worse. And so, after detection, there's response, and that's, I think, the post-mortem there. It's like understanding, what happened, right? We had an incident, something got through. What could we have done better? How could we have improved our response plan? And the final piece of it is education. And so we always think that education is, users are always responsible for the mistake. Somebody gets tricked into doing something. Somebody inadvertently clicks on a link or opens an attachment they shouldn't have, or gets duped into thinking the person they're talking to is someone they're not. Humans are the ones who are erroneous and lead to these problems in the vast majority of cases, right? And so driving awareness, I think, is really important. It's not something that's mandated like PCI DSS or HIPAA, or there's a lot of other mandated regulatory compliance trainings that don't exist, and I think they should for cybersecurity. But again, when we look at, for example, customers of ours who use security awareness training, which we offer, that covers a breadth of things and allows you to set out simulated attacks, and so you can understand, are your users actually listening, or are they still just clicking on cleverly crafted phishing emails? But the people who use a combination of security awareness training, DNS protection, and endpoint see 40% fewer threats than our customers who only see or only use endpoint. So to me, the data speaks for itself. And what I'm really excited about really is OpenText Cybersecurity, and what has changed in our portfolio over the past couple of years is OpenText has been sort of on a buying spree, which isn't bad. They've really filled out a wide breadth of capability within their cybersecurity portfolio. And last year, they acquired an email security vendor called Zix. And Zix is awesome because they provide us with a lot of great telemetry about email threat security. And what we've sort of been gapped on previously is having information about how email incorporates into the delivery of threats. And typically this is either through spear phishing, which is, a social engineering type of attack, or there's a lot of malware attachments. And one of the really cool findings from Zix data that we incorporated actually into our report last year was looking at a change Microsoft made to try to prevent so much malware from being sent via email using macros. And so basically they, last March, I think, changed the policy for how Office, and of course you had to be using the latest version of Office. So if you didn't update, this change didn't impact you. But they, when a file arrives on a PC, there are some hidden tags that tell the operating system where the file came from. And so anything that comes in via email is going to have like an internet tag. And basically they automatically strip macros off of files that came from the internet, because nobody is actually using macro technology for legitimate purpose, and then also sending it across email, they realized. And so, when we saw them enact that change, one of the most prolific botnets, Emotet, which delivers malware this way, we watched the activity just completely drop off. And then, of course, they pivot, and attachment types went from being Excel and Word documents with macros to these like larger attack chains. And so they replaced that with something that's an HTML attachment that has that basically is a download link to a zip. You then download the zip. Oftentimes, like the email will have the password for the zip, so you can't just extract the zip. You have to know what the password is from the email, because again, they're like, hey, this is an important thing. Here's your special password. You then unzip the file, and in that is an ISO. And in Windows 10 and beyond, will actually automatically mount that ISO as a virtual drive. And so then within that is a shortcut to launch a file that is either a masked file, so it'll say it's a PDF, but it's actually an executable. And you've just then convinced the user to, through going through like 6 or different steps or so, to just willingly running the malware that was contained in a password protected zip file. And so I just find it really interesting to see these, pivots in attack. But, for 6 or 7 months after that change by Microsoft, we saw like a very significant drop off in the Zix data that showed where malicious emails were responsible for malware distribution. So,
Yeah,
kind of cool data.
very much. You've talked about multi-layered defense. Is there an ideal number or configuration of layers? And maybe you can see, from where you sit, these are the must-haves, or these are the kind of ideal combination. These work together.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of critical ones. I think every business needs a layer of endpoint security that includes browser-based protection, because so much of the risk originates through the browser. And so that's either, people clicking on a link in an email, it opens the browser, it takes you somewhere, search engine spidering or SEO by malicious actors is really effective. And so we still see this, that a major news story breaks, people go to Google and they search for it. And within those top 20 links or something, there will always be something that's malicious. And so I think, browser-based URL protection is really critical. The other one is backup. You cannot operate today without having a backup solution in place. And, that can be the difference between going out of business from a ransomware attack and being able to push back and, maybe going through a painful process, but, not spending $200,000 or more recovering data that might be critical for your business to operate. So, I think those are critical. Beyond that, I'm a big advocate of user education, just because it's inexpensive and it's really effective. And it's like integrated nicely. And so depending, like for example, if you use the combination of our solutions and a user visits a website that we would block, you can then have you can have the user go through a quick little 60-second training that's like, hey, you just ran into a malicious site,
Right.
thankfully we stopped it, right? Damage averted. But, how did you get here? And, that is, I think, the underpinning thing that's important to improve upon, because our data also shows this. And we don't have time to go through everything in the report. And in fact, if I know RSA is next week, and we'll be there in the South Hall at 6:54, I'll be giving a presentation actually on this report. We'll have the full report in print too, if you'd like to pick it up. But layer defenses are certainly key. And as I was just mentioning before, right, you can integrate these things together so that you improve the overall education of users, so they're more risk averse. As somebody who's worked in IT for a long time, I would much rather somebody reach out and say, hey, this looks suspicious, should I open it? As opposed to, oh crap, I opened this and now I'm locked out of my computer.
Exactly.
They're very different reactions. So
when in doubt, slow down, pick up the phone, call somebody, confirm. I mean,
they're never going to be mad at you. I promise.
No.
They're going to be like, thank you. And I think it's a cultural thing too. Like, we really try to, push cybersecurity from a cultural perspective so that people understand the risk, because really, I mean, one simple user mistake can ultimately lead to the downfall of a small business. And, that's a terrible thing. And so
I was starting off in a new role, sales related role. And, when you first start off, you want to get a big win. And I received a purchase order for, it was, I think, $70,000 worth of devices. And which at that point, because typically the sales cycle is a little longer. And I was like, yeah. Awesome, man. But then I started looking at the information and I was like, before we ship anything, I'm gonna call. And the number they had, they'd done this well. They had somebody pick up and they're like, yeah, that's our order, da da da. But I went on and I was just, something didn't sit right. So I found, I actually searched the company online. Instead of taking the information off the PO, I found them online. And then I called the person through. And when I got through to him, first thing he said is, it's a lie. Don't send them anything.
Don't
So
send anything. Oh
obviously
no.
the guy
They've
had
run
been
through that before.
hammered. Yeah. And it was amazing because this was really well done. Well done. I mean, it was a legit looking PO, all the information. The only thing that was weird was that was how I spotted it. The delivery address for the devices was different from the company information that I found online. And in fact, it was a place near the airport down in Portland, Oregon. And it was just kind of like weird. And when I called the number on the PO, they go, "Oh yeah, that's our project site." And I'm like, okay, but it couldn't really tell me more. So my point is, most of the stuff is pretty obvious, but you never know, man.
Oh,
It's
I
always
mean,
good to
they
pick
can
up the
be
phone.
so clever. To your point, I
Yeah.
mean, hey, and that $70,000, had they gotten away with it, all of the time and effort for pulling, I mean, that's not a lot to go through to pull,
Yeah.
a gig like that. And I think that's the challenge. And the thing when people ask me about what does the future of cybersecurity look like, and is it getting better? And even though, like, for our customers who layers, like, we know layered security works, we literally have data to prove it. But I think there's a larger challenge with the overall threat ecosystem, and what software development has done, and the problem it's created, and
Hmm.
and how is that going to be fixed? Because really, cybersecurity is good, but when you have a vulnerability in a widely distributed piece of software like Microsoft Exchange, or a browser, and we see these zero-day browser exploits fixed all the time, like zero-day drive-bys, that to me, it's like there has to be a better, um, from the ground up. And again, it's unfortunately at odds with how the world seems to work. In that,
Hmm.
if I'm a small startup and I want to get my product out to market, um, security is costly. It's time
Yeah.
consuming.
Yeah.
So, like, what do I want to do? Do I want to, like, seize the moment and succeed? Or do I want to be secure and maybe miss my opportunity? And so you can guess which one wins out. And this is why year over year we see more and more, like, mass critical vulnerabilities, CVEs, in the 9.8 or above rate. And that's tough, because when that's the problem, all of your security layers kind of go out the window. When it's
Right.
like your security solution that's the whole in, um, uh-oh. And so, um, it's a challenge. And so I think, some things I think are going to improve this, like software bill of rights, or SBOMs,
Hmm.
and understanding, like when we saw Log4j last year, um, around, I guess, a little bit before this time. I mean, that's a really devastating vulnerability. Java is incorporated into so many different things that people don't even know. And so when I install some software and I want it to run inside of my environment, like, I really need to know, is your software all of your own IP? Or is it including third-party libraries and other components that I need to be aware of, so that when a CVE is released, I can more easily say, is this an impact to me or not? And so I think that can kind of help fix, because I don't anticipate fixing the embedding cybersecurity from the beginning. In startups, I don't see it happening. More mature software companies, I get it. Yeah, they can do this. But will they? Again, it's cost and complexity. But transparency, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, earlier you mentioned that GitHub was hosting or serving as a repository for some of these. I think you said it was a
well,
phishing
for
kit.
phishing kits, but they're more like white hat. So they'll help you identify URLs that are associated with different branded phishing kits. Yeah, there's actually
Gotcha.
a pretty thriving community on GitHub for phishing discovery and activity. So
Okay.
I like the community approach, because one of the other things I always gripe about is that cybersecurity suffers from a lack of collaboration. We have all these for-profit companies thinking that they're going to solve the problem for all of their customers, and then we have cybercrime as a service, and a collaborative adversary that in many ways works together in many much more efficiently um, than the security industry does, with respect to sharing indicators of compromise, sharing threat intelligence, sharing techniques to be effective. These are all sort of problems that we're all expected to solve as individual companies, and it's hard to be an army of 100 little divisions fighting a problem that sees the benefit of collaboration.
Yeah. No, I mean the sharing of information is huge.
Mhm.
I- you were talking about the threat landscape, and you were talking about the complexity of software, but if we go in another direction, back to social engineering, one of the things that I think is probably going to be increasingly common is the use of AI with voice simulation, because we're all being recorded all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Our phone is spying on us, whether
it doesn't even take more than like 10 seconds of hearing you talk for the model to emulate you well.
Yeah.
Like 10 seconds of audio. That's not hard to capture.
That's pretty crazy. And so when I lived in Japan and Korea, one of the most common types of attacks, which was not cyber related at all, but was just people would be calling, senior citizens saying, hey, I'm your grandson, or we have your grandson.
Oh,
and
yeah.
If you don't pay. And then they would put them on the phone and say, hey, please help me, and if you're, depending on what's your cognitive state and condition at the time, and how, so
totally
maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 20 would pay, or whatever the number is, but it's just a kind of a numbers game. But those were very crude attempts. And, these things are they're going to cause a lot more trouble going forward.
There's no question. I'm sure you've, and your listeners are familiar with GPT and generative text, and that's just on the text front of things. But you're absolutely right. I think the combination of that, the ability to rapidly consume all information about a specific individual based on their online available information, and then to rapidly craft and cater very convincing messaging is not a good thing. You're going to see this attack dating sites and social media sites, and the ability to create misinformation just goes up with this. And then to the attack side of it, like the voice-based deepfakes are a real concern, because one of the ways that we've been advising to circumvent social engineering attacks that look to do basically like a email chain hijacking, or that last moment swapping the account number, good ways to circumvent that is having two different mediums for communication. And so you might do part of the process via email, but the final part is done through some other system. Or if I get an email, pick up the phone and call. If it's pick up the phone and call now, it's like it better be FaceTime because the audio video deepfakes are actually still very difficult to do convincingly. But for how long? But yeah, so
it's gonna keep us both busy and the entire industry busy for a long time to come. So,
the thing that makes me happy is that there's a lot of good success stories, and I think one of the challenges having worked in cybersecurity for almost 20 years is that I've been told we didn't work before a lot. Customers are very quick to notice when something didn't go right. You hear about it, but when it works right, you don't hear about it, and nothing happened, and that's the point. And I do know that we've definitely improved and helped and prevented far more than we have failed. And so despite the problem still persisting, it's encouraging to see through true data. I'm a huge data-driven guy, so when I get to see actual data that proves our assumptions of how layered security will have a positive impact, it makes me feel like there is some hope still. So
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, hey Grayson, really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for sharing the research, and good luck at RSA next week.
Again, we have a booth at the South Expo Hall 654, and on Monday and Tuesday night I will be giving a presentation that covers the threat report, go into a bit more detail, and of course we'll have the full report as well in case you want all of the detail.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Grayson.
Hey Mark, it's been a pleasure.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.